elemental nature is at its most dramatic in the mountainous landscape that frames the lochs along Scotland's west coast. The rocks here have been weathered for millions of years by ice and fire, wind and water, and for generations the people have used the elements beneath their feet to survive. Scotland's lochs are a product of an element we have in spectacular abundance: water. With so much of the stuff about, it's hardly surprising that there are tens of thousands of lochs in Scotland, and they come in all shapes and sizes. We've got long fjord-like sea lochs, great freshwater lochs of the Central Highlands, and innumerable lochans that stud the open moors. In this series, I'm setting out on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, meeting the people who live close to their shores and discovering how lochs have influenced an entire nation. For this grand tour, I'm heading from a point way out west to a fabled mountain, unearthing stories quite literally from the ground. My journey starts on Ardnamurchan, heads for the beautiful and secluded Lochs Sunart, then crosses the mountains to Loch Linnhe, where I stop at a medieval Stuart castle and encounter an ancient goddess guarding a dark loch. This is the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, and this is the famous lighthouse facing the wild seas of the North Atlantic. Ardnamurchan Lighthouse is not only the most westerly lighthouse on the Scottish mainland, it also marks the most westerly point on the whole island of Great Britain, making this a rather special place for me to begin my grand tour. I love lighthouses. In fact, in a previous incarnation, I was briefly employed by the Northern Lighthouse Board. As a mobile lighthouse keeper, I had to keep the lights burning and the lenses turning at 3 lighthouses around the Scottish coast. But I've never been up Ardnamurchan, as they say. Ardnamurchan is a Gaelic name, of course, and one translation means the headland of the great seas. And from up here, the view is truly oceanic. Despite the tame and gentle weather today, this can be a wild and hostile place, and boats heading around the coast often face a potentially dangerous voyage. There's an old sailor's tradition which says that any mariner who successfully sails around Ardnamurchan Point can place a sprig of white heather on his masthead to signify his good fortune. Now, I've just come around on foot, so I'm probably stretching the rules a wee bit, but I don't see why that disqualifies me in any way from seeking good fortune from a sprig of lucky white heather. Just around the coast from the lighthouse, I come to one of the most scenic beaches anywhere on the west coast. The gorgeous Sana Bay, with its pristine white sands and turquoise seas, has exceptional views west to the small isles. But the peace and tranquility of Sana today is in stark contrast to the destructive elemental forces that were once unleashed deep within the earth. It's almost impossible to imagine now, but go back 60 million years and there would have been an absolutely enormous volcano rumbling underneath the ground near to this spot. To find out more, I'm heading inland to meet geologist Alan McCurdy, who wants to take me on a journey through deep time into the heart of the volcano. Alan, we've come some distance away from the beach, up here onto the hill. Now, go back 60 million years ago. what would the environment here have been like, do you think?
Well, we're sitting in the remains of an ancient volcano. Volcano, as you say, that was active 60 million years ago. And since that time, ice, wind and water has eroded or cut down the surface of the volcano. So we're sitting in what would have been the magma chamber of this ancient volcano.
Now, how big was this volcano?
Something in the order of about 6 or 7 kilometres across.
Wow. I understand you can actually see a very distinct crater shape from the air.
Yes, indeed, and we've got a wonderful aerial shot here which shows this outer ring of mountains that defines the ancient magma chamber. We're sitting in the centre of it, so we've got a grandstand view of the whole structure.
This volcano wasn't by itself, was it? It was part of a wider network.
About 65 million years ago, and North America and Europe went their separate ways, forming the North Atlantic. And as a result, the crust thinned quite dramatically. And a series of 7 or 8 volcanoes popped up through this thin crust. So that's Rockall, St Kilda, Skye, Ardnamurchan, Rum, Mull, Arn and Ailsa Craig were all active over a 10 million year period.
It's incredible to think that Scotland's west coast is littered with volcanoes that witnessed the birth of the North Atlantic, whose waters now fill all these beautiful lochs, like Lochs Sunart with the little village of Kilcoen, which until a road to the east was opened in 1900 was only accessible by ferry. Kilcoen is traditionally a crofting community, providing a way of life that was never meant to get people rich. Not having enough land to make a living, people were often forced to look for other work to supplement their income. Rosie Curtis is a modern crofter, helping to keep the tradition alive by working the land. But it's common for crofting culture to hug the Highland coastline, and the sea is often as important as the land. One of Rosie's many jobs is tending a fish farm near the gaping mouth of Lochs Sunart.
This is your daily commute, I'm guessing.
This is my beautiful travel to work every morning, which is fantastic.
You do a lot of juggling, do you not, when it comes to work, because you still croft, is that right?
Yeah, I've got a small croft. I've got 60 black-faced sheep and some Highland cows.
Crofting was never a full-time occupation, was it? It was there to kind of supplement your income.
Yeah, and we do 8 hours, 10 to 10 hours out here, and then you've obviously got whatever you do in the croft. I'm also involved in the Coast Guard and the Fire Brigade, so you never know when you might be called out with them. So you could be 24 hours.
Do you ever sleep?
Sometimes, yeah.
A short sea journey brings us to some large netted pens floating in the loch. I want to hear from Rosie about some new pesticide-free techniques to control sea lice infestations on fish.
How many fish have you got in there?
In this pen I've got 26,000 fish at the moment.
What do you say to people who are a bit critical of fish farms because of the potential environmental consequences? I mean, you must be aware of that.
I've got lumpfish and wrasse, so you know, that's cleaner fish which help to eat the lice off the back of the salmon.
Well, that means if the lice are being picked off by the cleaner fish, then you're using less pesticide.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, between wrasse and lumpfish and also now flushers coming in, you know, you're hardly doing any chemical treatments at all now.
Well, that's
fantastic. Hopefully this is the future in fish farming.
Leaving Rosie to her duties, I'm pleased to hear that this important part of the rural economy may have a more sustainable future. My route now heads for the upper reaches of Lochs Sunart, which is one of the longest sea lochs on the west coast, running west to east for 31 kilometres. The views here seem to be timeless. Many of the hills above the loch are covered in ancient woods. In places, they sweep all the way down to the shore. This is a beautiful, peaceful location where the trees are mostly native oak, mixed with birch, alder and hazel, making this an extremely important but increasingly rare habitat.
These ancient woods are a remnant of a great forest which once spread all the way along the Atlantic seaboard from northern Spain to Norway. In Scotland, it's known as the Celtic rainforest.
Today, only fragments of it survive. Although undeniably beautiful, it's not entirely a wild place. In fact, if you'd come down to the woods in the 18th or 19th century, you'd have found a veritable woodland industry flourishing here. The clues are there if you know how to read the forest correctly. And one man who can do just that is woodlands expert and historian Jamie McIntyre. He shows me how people harvested wood sustainably without felling whole trees.
Exactly how industrial was it here then?
It was really quite intensively managed for a period.
Now, what's significant about this tree, Jamie?
This is a coppice stool. You can tell it's a coppice stool because it's multi-stemmed. What would have happened is it would have been a single tree cut at the base, regrew as a thicket of shoots. These would have been thinned out to maybe 6 or 7 per stool and allowed to grow on for the full rotation, which was about 25 years. But as you can see, this was never cut again, and each individual pole has grown on to become a kind of tree trunk in its own right.
For centuries, the wood here was harvested to supply bark for the leather tanning industry and charcoal to fuel the iron forges. And it doesn't take Jamie long to find evidence of this.
What's this low retaining wall ahead of us?
This is part of a recessed platform, and these were the areas that people burnt the charcoal on. If we dig here, we might find some charcoal.
Well, there seems to be a lot of roots down here, Jamie, but I don't see any charcoal.
I think you need to get your hand in amongst it and root around a bit. There you go, there's a big bit.
Wow, who would have thought it? 200-year-old charcoal. And what was this used for?
This was used in the iron furnaces that were set up along the west coast.
Now just look at that. We've got archaeological evidence of the industrial past of this beautiful wood. Amazing.
Coppicing began a slow decline from the 18th century onwards as coal mined from deep in the earth replaced charcoal from the forest. But it was mining lead rather than coal that put this place on the map, and rather surprisingly, an altogether new substance called strontium, from this place, Strontian. On a hillside overlooking the village, I hitch a lift in a giant dump truck driven by Dan MacDonald. He owns the mines, which are silent after centuries of use, and the site is now used as a quarry.
If you just let me off here, Dan, that'd be great. No bother.
Dan drops me near the dark mouth of a mine, through which I'll be guided by David McCallum, who has written about the history of the place.
Hi, Paul, how are you?
And who thankfully seems to know his way around this labyrinth of dark tunnels.
Dave, how long has mining been going on here at Strontian?
Commercially since the 1720s, right through to the 1990s.
What were they actually mining for down here?
Lead, copper and iron.
Dave shows me the most important ore for the production of lead.
This is galena, which is lead sulfide. It occurs naturally in those shiny cubic form.
What was it used for?
It could be casted and rolled into sheets, and of course for military purposes it could be used as lead shot. Being so close to the Jacobite rebellions and the Napoleonic Wars, the price of lead and these mines assumed a strategic importance for the district.
Now that's quite interesting because this area around Strontian was famous for its support of the Jacobite cause, and it was the army that were using this to fire lead shot back at the locals.
Absolutely.
There's a really interesting connection between the lead ore that was being mined here and strontian, the element.
That's right. The strontianite occurs as a byproduct in the veins. It wasn't commercially usable to the lead miners, and they discarded it.
And you've got an example here.
Here, this is strontianite.
It's absolutely beautiful, isn't it?
Nobody really knew what was in it. They presumed that it was a new earth, as they call it, a new element.
How did it get its name?
When scientists extracted the element from the strontianite in 1808, they named the element strontium after the village.
Strontium from Strontian, the village.
Strontian.
It's used in fireworks, is it not?
It is. Every element has a characteristic colour, and strontium in an explosion, for example, or a fire, will emit a beautiful crimson red flame, vivid red flame.
Now I think you're going to show me a wee flame test. Right, with a lovely flame.
Got some strontium salt here, very, very similar to the strontium carbonate in the mine, mixed with a little water.
Wow! Look at that flame.
That's typical strontium firework red.
Emerging from the dark tunnel system of the mines, it's fascinating to think that this little corner of the West Highlands is forever enshrined in the Scientific Hall of Fame. Heading east, I cross the mountains and down to sea level to the salt waters of Loch Linnhe, formed by the upper reaches of the Firth of Lorne, which penetrates 50 kilometres inland to Fort William in the north. This is Loch Linnhe, known in Gaelic as An Linn Dhu, or the Black Pool. Crossing the loch to the eastern shore, I make my way through an area which glories in the romantic sounding name of Appin. In my mind, Appin is forever associated with tales of Jacobite intrigue, symbolised by the improbably picturesque Castle Stalker, standing proud on its tidal island in Loch Linnhe.
Castle Stalker is one of the most iconic fortified houses to be found anywhere in Scotland, and its image appears on a host of postcards, calendars, and in advertising, and it's a place I've always wanted to visit.
I've come to meet Alistair Allwood, the castle's current keeper.
Now, your family have had the castle for a while.
Yes, since 1965. My late father bought it as a ruin, and he then spent the next 10, 20 years restoring it to what you see today. I spent every school holiday here working on the castle, but I've got to say now, looking back on it, it was worth it.
Now, Alistair, the name Castle Stalker, where does that come from?
Well, Stalker is a Gaelic word, and it means falconer. So this is the castle of the falconer. But it's got a great link with falconry, this castle, because it was used as a royal hunting lodge by King James IV, who was very keen on falconry.
Because he was a Stuart.
The Stuarts of Appin were cousins of the royal Stuarts, which is why James used this as a hunting lodge.
These, of course, are the battlements. And of course, it's been used as a location for some films.
Well, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, filmed here back in 1974 it was. And yes, I'm in fact in the film.
Right.
I came up here as a 20-year-old student to let them in for the day's filming, and they ended up giving me a part in the film.
What are you doing?
In fact, I play the part of one of the French taunters up on the battlements here with John Cleese, taunting King Arthur down below.
Alistair has made a little museum in the castle to commemorate taking part in one of the cult comedies of the 1970s. And this picture of him on the day of filming is surely its centrepiece.
That must have been tremendous fun.
Absolutely amazing. We spent the whole day literally just laughing, all of us. It's like a boys' weekend out, and especially John Cleese. So funny. He kept on cracking up. Every time he came out with that outrageous French accent. It's the first time he'd done it he just fell about laughing, and then we did, and everyone did.
It's worth it, though.
Absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
Best day of my life.
Despite all the mythology, Monty Python and the Holy Grail wasn't exactly a fairy tale. But I can't resist the temptation to wave my magic wand and help Alistair revisit the best day of his life.
Behold the castle! At last, my quest is at an end. Oh, thank the Lord that he has delivered me to this holy of holies. What? Foul fiend! In the name of the Lord, I demand entrance to this sacred castle.
No chance, you roast beef bedwetting dabs and tiny-brained wipers of other people's bottoms.
How dare you? Maintain your dignity. Maintain your dignity, Arthur.
From the ridiculous to the sublime. I'm heading inland, up Loch Linnhe, where an eastward branch of this huge sea loch takes me to the much more sheltered Loch Leven and the village of Ballachulish.
Sounds heavenly. Now that beautiful music comes from a harp workshop where extraordinarily skilled craftsmen make instruments for angels.
Ingrid Henderson lives locally and has been playing the harp since childhood. Long before the bagpipe made its stamp on the mythology of Scotland, the Gaelic harp was our national instrument and the mainstay of courtly music. The harp in Scotland can trace its history at least as far back as the ancient Picts, and images of harps have been discovered cut into decorative Pictish stones. Ingrid is playing an instrument made by Starfish Harp Makers, founded in 1987. I meet up with Dave Shepton, who shows me how this musical tradition lives on here, near the banks of Loch Leven.
How did you get into making harps?
Well, my history is actually in boat building.
Yeah.
And I just came to Starfish for a summer job once and ended up staying.
Was it useful for you, having had a background in boat building?
Yeah, I think both industries have strange shaped pieces of wood. We don't work with straight lines, we work with curves and angles all the time. And so there is a correlation between the two, and you'll quite often see boat builders in this industry.
In a way, there is something hull-like about this, isn't there?
Very much so. Yeah. And we use some bracing inside, which is not unlike the ribs of a boat for extra strength. There's a lot of tension on a harp, so we have to make this structure very strong.
Now, Dave, this is, I'm guessing, the business end of the harp, is it?
It is. It's the sound box. This is made of American black walnut, 11 separate pieces all the way around.
These harps, are they classics?
They are the modern version of a classic.
They are?
And here in Scotland, we tend to still refer to them as classics, whereas in other parts of the world, they are sometimes called lever harps and Celtic harps.
There is history and tradition everywhere in this part of the country. But the peaty soils here are riddled with mysteries that run much deeper than recorded history, into the Iron and Bronze Age, when it seems goddesses were venerated on the banks of the loch.
In 1880, a labourer digging in a peat bog made a remarkable discovery. Lying face down in the mud was the carved figure of a woman. Now, a photograph taken at the time reveals a totemic representation of the female form.
Tragically, the Victorians didn't possess modern preservation skills, and the wooden figure dried out, cracked and warped by the time it got to Edinburgh.
Is this the Ballachulish goddess? Is this her?
I've joined this local scout group in an archaeological experiment in order to understand how the local peaty soils preserve wooden artefacts like this and how they degrade when removed. This is just a replica of the goddess, but it's a way for the kids to connect to one of Scotland's most mysterious archaeological finds. But what could this 2,500-year-old female represent? I've come to meet a man who has an interesting theory on the subject. Jimmy Cormack, whose interest in the goddess was sparked through his work at a local museum.
Do you think there's any connection between the Ballachulish goddess and the Loch Leaven in any way?
Well, it's not very far away from the narrowest part of Loch Leaven. And that's where most travellers would cross the loch. And some people say it was like a goddess there that you left offerings for safe passage.
Like a guardian angel?
Like a guardian angel, the very same, yep.
What's great though is the fact that she's ultimately mysterious.
Everybody needs a bit of mystery in their life, Paul. And we've got ours here in Ballachulish.
Having paid due homage to this ancient and mysterious goddess, I make my way along the banks of Loch Leaven, which is one of the darkest and most mysterious of all Scotland's sea lochs. I'm heading for the final destination of this grand tour, a sacred mountain that dominates the view from where the Loch goddess was first erected. Guarding the entrance to Loch Leaven and to the approach to formidable Glencoe is the Pap of Glencoe, named for all the obvious reasons. It, or should I say she, dominates the scene, and I'm told that there's a particularly fine viewpoint from the lofty summit. Although be warned, it's relentlessly steep. As I climb, I'm minded of the beginning of my journey at the Ardnamurchan volcano, grumbling away 60 million years ago. The whole of Glencoe was also an ancient volcano, one of the Earth's monsters, big enough to earn the title of supervolcano, except this one was blowing its top 400 million years ago. In the presence of such deep Earth history, the Coppice Woods, Castle Stalker and the Ballachulish goddess all seem rather recent.
It's quite tricky underfoot. Up here.
The final summit stretch is a steep pull up increasingly rocky ground, and it's something of a lungbuster to reach Journey's End.
What a brilliant place to end my grand tour, and what a superb view. To the north you've got Ben Nevis and the Moors, and below me the dark waters of Loch Leaven, while to the east you've got the entrance to Glencoe and the highest mountains in Argyll, and behind me the waters of Loch Linnhe and the distant hills of Moydart, stretching all the way to Ardnamurchan and the beginning of my journey from Point to Pap.
Join me for my next grand tour among the peaty lochs of Caithness and Sutherland, to the promise of gold on the north coast.